The arena went silent after the human asked, "Should I return it alive or shredded?" The transport smelled like recycled air and Ambassador Fenwick's cologne, which he applied in quantities that suggested he believed confidence came in a spray bottle. I stood near the rear hatch, watching the stars outside the porthole, not because they were beautiful, because counting them kept my hands from doing what they wanted to do, which was check my gear for the 9th time when I had no gear to check. We were guests. Guests don't carry weapons to diplomatic summits. Fenwick was rehearsing something into the small mirror he carried in his breast pocket. He had been rehearsing for 4 hours. He cleared his throat like a man gargling with his own importance and said, "Specialist Mace, you should prepare yourself. The Varric are extraordinarily sensitive to body language. Try to appear soft." I looked at him. He looked at my expression. He went back to his mirror. "My name is Dara Mace. I am 24 years old. I grew up in New Orleans on the east side, where softness was something you practiced in private, if at all. I spent 3 years fighting professionally before the war, then 4 years after it began fighting in the Defense Corps, where they discovered that my particular set of skills was more useful in certain rooms than a rifle. I am 5 feet 6 inches tall, 142 pounds, and I have broken things in me that never healed quite right, and I do not consider this a complaint. The Varric had requested a human representative. They had gotten Fenwick, who had a doctorate in interspecies relations, and me, who had a record. The transport docked. I heard the clamps. I heard the hiss of atmosphere equalizing. I felt the temperature drop 2 degrees, which the briefing documents had warned us about. Varric preferred cooler environments, something about their bioluminescent glands functioning better in the cold. I filed that away with everything else I had filed away about them. Fenwick straightened his jacket. He looked at me and said, "Please try to smile." I smiled. He winced. "Perhaps just stand there," he said. We walked out. The corridor leading to the conclave hall was long and curved slightly, which I noted because curved corridors prevent you from seeing what is ahead until you are already committed to it. The walls were a dark, almost black material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and the only illumination came from narrow strips along the floor that pulsed in slow rhythms, blue, and then purple, and then a color I did not have a name for. Varric handlers met us at the entrance, 3 of them, 8-limbed, the way the briefing documents described, but the documents had not prepared me for the way their light moved. It did not glow steadily. It shifted under their skin, like something trying to get out, patterns of pale gold moving through their bodies in waves when they breathed, or gestured, or looked at something with interest. They looked at Fenwick with polite, measured attention. They looked at me and lit up like a circuit board completing. Not threatening, not aggressive, something closer to recognition. I noted that. Said nothing. The conclave hall opened ahead of us, and I did what I always do when I walk into a new space. I found the exits first. 1. A single entrance and exit, the corridor we had just walked through, behind us now. I found the sightlines next. Poor. The hall was circular, tiered, the audience arranged in rising rings of seating that climbed toward a distant ceiling, and every single seat was occupied. I did not try to count. I estimated instead. Tens of thousands. The floor was the last thing I looked at. White stone, or something like stone, and at intervals along the outer edge of it, where the floor met the first ring of seats, there were narrow channels cut into the surface, covered with grates. Drains. Drains. I looked at the drains. I looked at the single exit. I looked at the crowd arranged like an audience, not a committee. Fenwick was still talking to the handlers about the humidity. The Varric High Arbiter was waiting at the center of the floor, taller than the others. Older, I thought, though I had no idea how to age a Varric. The patterns of light moving through it were slower, more deliberate. It held itself with the specific stillness of something that has never in its life needed to hurry. On its third left appendage, near the midpoint joint, there was a scar. Old. Healed imperfectly, the tissue raised and slightly darker than the surrounding skin. Something had hit that appendage hard enough to leave a mark that did not fade. I could not stop looking at it. Fenwick stepped forward and began his prepared remarks. His voice was smooth and practiced, and said a lot of words that meant nothing, which is the language of diplomacy, and the arbiter listened with its head tilted at a precise angle that suggested either great attention or great patience, and possibly both. I stood 3 steps behind and 2 steps to the right, which is where bodyguards stand, and I watched the crowd instead of Fenwick, which is what bodyguards do, and the crowd was watching me instead of Fenwick, which bodyguards do not usually experience. They were watching me, the way you watch something you have been waiting for. I felt it like a pressure change, like a room dropping in temperature before a storm comes. The recognition I had seen in the handler's light was here too, distributed across 50,000 bodies, a kind of collective attention that pressed against the back of my neck. Fenwick finished his prepared remarks. He smiled his diplomat's smile. He gestured toward me and said something about Earth's delegation being honored to present its representative. The High Arbiter did not look at Fenwick after that. It looked at me. It spoke in a language that sounded like water finding its way through rock, consonants and vowels made from something other than a human mouth, and the translation device clipped to my collar rendered it in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly neutral and said, "We welcome Specialist Dara Mace of Earth. Corps designation. Pre-conflict personal combat record. 41 bouts. 38 victories. The last 14 consecutive. The method of each." It listed the methods. Fenwick stopped breathing. I heard the crowd. 10,000 alien species making sounds that my translator did not bother converting because they were not words. They were something older than words. The sound an audience makes when it sees what it came to see. The Arbiter finished the recitation and looked at me with that slow, deliberate bioluminescence pulsing through it, and it said, "Earth has been invited to join the Galactic Accord." I waited. "There are conditions," it said. My hands went still. Both of them, down at my sides, fingers flat, the way they go when my brain stops sending the usual signals because it needs all available resources for processing. Fenwick touched my arm. I did not look at him. They had not invited Earth to negotiate. They had read my fight record to 50,000 spectators. They had installed drains in the floor. I looked at the Arbiter's scarred appendage and thought about what kind of force leaves a mark like that on something designed by evolution to survive. Sweet merciful hell. I looked up at the crowd. I looked at the single exit behind us. I looked at the drains. I was not a diplomat, but I had walked into enough enclosed spaces with one door to understand the difference between a room and a trap. This was not a room. Fenwick was still touching my arm. His fingers were shaking slightly, which I felt but did not acknowledge, because one of us needed to not be shaking, and it was not going to be him. The Arbiter waited. The crowd waited. 50,000 species, holding something that was not breath but served the same function, suspended in that moment between the question being understood and the answer being given. I had been in this moment before. Not here. Not with an alien audience and a single door and drains in a white stone floor. But the shape of the moment was familiar, the weight of it, the specific quality of silence that a room produces when everyone in it has already decided what is going to happen, and they are only waiting for you to catch up. I had caught up. I just did not let it show on my face. "What are the conditions?" I said. My voice came out level. It always does. That is the one thing that has never failed me, even when everything else was. The Arbiter's light shifted through something that might have been satisfaction. "The trial of relevant worth," it said. Behind me, I heard Fenwick exhale in a way that was almost a word. I kept my eyes on the Arbiter. "Tell me," I said. The trial of relevant worth, as the Arbiter explained it, was not complicated. Every species petitioning for entry into the Galactic Accord was required to demonstrate that they possessed something of value to the wider galactic community. Something that justified the resources, the protections, the shared intelligence networks, the trade rights, the 112 other benefits that came with membership. Some species demonstrated scientific advancement. Some demonstrated art, or agriculture, or navigational knowledge of specific star systems, or biological adaptations that could be studied for medical benefit. Humanity's demonstration, the Arbiter informed us, would be combat. Specifically, one human combatant against the arena champion. The arena champion's name was the Greth, Fenwick said. "Absolutely not," in the voice of a man who has never had to back up anything he has ever said with his body. I put one hand on his arm, the same way he had put his on mine. Light touch, enough weight to mean something. He stopped. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the arbiter. "What happens," I said, "to the species that lose?" The arbiter held perfectly still for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when 50,000 people are watching. "Their petition is denied," it said. "And the species?" Another pause, shorter. "Their petition is denied," it said again. Which was an answer, technically. It was also the kind of answer that means the full answer is something you already know, and the speaker is not going to make you comfortable by saying it plainly. 23 species had faced this trial. 23 petitions denied. 23 species no longer in any census I had been briefed on. I looked at the arbiter's scarred appendage. I had been looking at it in between looking at other things. The scar was on the third left limb, midpoint joint, raised tissue healed over something that had been a real wound once. Not a defensive wound. The angle of it, the way the scar tissue pulled slightly upward, suggested impact from below. Something striking upward into that joint. "What hit your arm?" I said. The hall produced a sound that my translator did not convert. The sound of an audience reacting to something it did not expect. Fenwick made a noise beside me. The arbiter looked at my face for a long moment. Its light shifted through a pattern I had not seen before, something that moved differently than the others, slower, and then faster, like a thought working itself out. "A combatant," it said, "from a species that no longer exists." I nodded. I filed that. A species that no longer exists. A combatant from that species who hit the high arbiter hard enough to leave a scar that lasted long enough to still be visible, on a being old enough that I could not guess its age. A combatant who got close enough to the arbiter to reach it. Almost. Almost won. "I accept the trial," I said. Fenwick grabbed my sleeve. Not my arm. My sleeve. Like a man reaching for something solid in a room that is tilting. I looked at his hand on my sleeve. He removed it. "Specialist mace," he said, low and precise and controlled, in the voice he used when he was very frightened and very determined not to show it. "You do not have the authority." "Ambassador," I said, just as low, with respect, "you stopped being the most relevant person in this room, about 12 minutes ago." He was quiet. I turned back to the arbiter. "I accept the trial," I said again. "Terms, timeline, rules of engagement. Walk me through it." And the arbiter did. I listened to all of it. I asked 4 questions. Precise ones, the kind that tell you more from what is not answered than what is. I watched the arbiter's light patterns while it spoke, cataloging which descriptions made the light quicken and which made it slow, because that was data. Everything is data. At the end, I said, "How long before the trial?" 48 Varick Standard Hours, the arbiter said, equivalent to approximately 30 of your Earth hours. 30 hours. "I want footage," I said. "Every previous trial the Greth competed in. It will be provided. I want food. Real food, not nutritional approximations." A pause. "We will do our best to approximate. I want 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep." The arbiter's light did something I was beginning to recognize as surprise, in preparation for. "Yes," I said. "Sleep. 8 hours. Non-negotiable." I turned and walked toward the exit without being dismissed. Behind me, I heard the hall make that sound again, the sound of tens of thousands of beings processing something they had not calculated for. Fenwick caught up with me in the corridor, his footsteps quicker than usual. He walked beside me for a moment without speaking, and I could feel him arranging and then discarding things to say. Finally he said, "Do you understand what you've done?" "Bought us 30 hours, I said. "Dara. Keep walking, Ambassador." He kept walking. 23 species. One almost made it. Almost is the loneliest word in any language, and I had been keeping company with it since I was old enough to understand what the word meant. I had practice. They gave me a room that was too cold and too quiet, which suited me fine on both counts. They provided the footage within the hour, transferred to a Varick display unit that my handlers spent 20 minutes teaching me to operate. I learned it in 4. I thanked them. They pulsed with something uncertain and left me alone with the screen and the hours. I watched all 23 bouts. Then I watched them again. I did not move from the chair while I watched. I did not pace. I did not make notes yet. The first pass was just watching, absorbing, letting my eyes and my instincts process before my brain started talking over them. The Greth was enormous. The briefing documents had told me that 8 feet tall, 4 upper limbs, 2 of which terminated in structures that evolution had designed with a single purpose in mind, an exoskeleton that covered the majority of its body, 17 victories in 17 bouts. But the footage told me things the briefing documents could not. The Greth was fast. Not fast the way a human athlete is fast, trained speed built through incremental effort. Fast the way a falling object is fast, pure physics, and no hesitation. In every single bout, across all 23, it was at full speed within the first 10 seconds. And in every single bout, across all 23, the fight was over, before the 3-minute mark. It did not grind. It did not pace itself. It came in like a force of nature, and it ended things quickly, and then it stood in the center of the floor, while the audience made their sounds, and the arena officials confirmed the result. On my second pass through the footage, I was looking at something specific. The Greth's left lateral side, where the upper exoskeleton joined the lower section. There was a joint there, a necessary one, a place where the armor had to flex to allow the Greth's particular way of moving. And when the Greth extended fully, arms extended, body turned to maximum reach, that joint opened. Not much, not for long. I timed it across multiple bouts. 0.4 seconds, maybe 0.35. The joint opened and closed in less than half a second. The Greth had never had to worry about that vulnerability, because nothing had ever made it extend fully enough to expose it, and then been alive long enough to do anything about the exposure. I wrote that down. I picked up the small notebook I had brought in my jacket pocket. Actual paper, actual pen, because I think better when I write by hand. And I wrote, 0.4 seconds. Left lateral joint, full extension only. I wrote underneath it, it has never gone past 3 minutes. I stared at that for a while. Then I wrote, it does not know what to do with someone who is still moving at minute 4. I circled that. I slept 8 hours exactly. My handlers, who had apparently stationed themselves outside my door, responded to my request for food with something close to alarm, as though the act of requiring sleep and nutrition before a life-or-death event was a cultural peculiarity they had not been briefed on. I ate. The food was not quite right in ways I could not fully name, too close to the real thing to be called wrong, but just slightly off in the way that copies of things are always slightly off. I ate all of it anyway, protein and carbohydrates and water, which my body did not care about the cultural origin of. Then the handlers told me the Greth had requested a pre-trial assessment. They explained it was traditional, a formality, fighters meeting before the bout. I said fine. They brought me to a smaller room, lower ceilinged, and the Greth was already there. The footage had not quite prepared me for being in the same space as it, not because it was more frightening than I expected. I had watched 23 species face it. I had a functional understanding of what it was capable of. But there is a difference between watching something on a screen and standing 12 feet away from it and feeling the air in the room change because of the space it occupies. It looked at me. I looked at it. And then it laughed. I knew it was laughter not because my translator confirmed it, but because laughter has a shape, in any species, in any register. The Greth made a sound that came from its chest and moved through its body in a wave, and it looked at me while it made that sound, and the meaning of the sound was as clear as if it had been in English. It looked at me. It laughed. I thought about all 17 of its victories. I thought about 23 species whose names I had read in a briefing document under the heading of Petitions Denied. I thought about the being that left a scar on the arbiter's arm before something ended it. I said nothing. I turned and walked back to my room. I sat on the floor. Not the bed, the floor. Back against the wall, knees up, the way I used to sit in locker rooms before fights when the bench felt too high and too separate from the ground. I needed the ground under me. My hands wrapped around each other, and I stared at the wall, and I was somewhere else for a moment. Somewhere I did not name and did not visit long, and I came back the way I always came back. Anger. Sweet, familiar, steadying anger. Not the kind that burns through your control. The kind that settles into your chest like ballast. The kind that has been there so many times it knows where it belongs. and it sits there and it says, "You are still here. You are still standing. The floor is still under you. You know what to do." I picked up my notebook. I looked at the circled note. It does not know what to do with someone who is still moving at minute 4. The Greth had laughed because I was small, because I looked like nothing that had ever challenged it, because from where it stood, looking at me was the answer to a question that did not need to be asked. I had been small my whole life. Small teaches you things that big never has to learn. I uncapped my pen. I drew a line under the circled note and wrote underneath it, "Survive the first 3 minutes." Everything else would follow from that, or it would not follow at all. The arena was larger from the inside than it had appeared in the footage. I noted that as I walked out. It was not a complaint, just information, the way everything is information if you choose to receive it that way. The floor was very white. The drains were exactly where I remembered them from my first observation of the hall. The ceiling was distant enough that it didn't feel like a ceiling. The crowd was already at capacity. I did not count them. I had already done that math. I looked at the one exit. I looked at Fenwick somewhere in the tiered seating, too far up for me to read his expression, but his silhouette had the shape of a man trying to look composed and not quite managing it. And then I waved. I lifted one hand, and I waved at the crowd the way you wave at someone you know, across a crowded room. A simple, human gesture, easy and familiar and completely out of place in an alien arena, before what everyone in attendance understood was a fight for the right of my entire species to exist in the galactic community. I waved. The crowd went silent. Not the shocked silence of offense. Something more interesting. The silence of 50,000 beings encountering a behavior that did not fit any category they had prepared. Then the Greth entered. It did not wave. It entered the way it always entered, direct and certain, moving with the particular quality of something that has never once considered the possibility of losing. It was larger in the open floor than it had seemed even in the smaller assessment room. The exoskeleton caught the arena lighting and fractured it. Its 4 upper limbs moved in small, controlled adjustments as it walked, calibrating, preparing. It looked at me. It did not laugh this time. I took that as information. The arbiter spoke the formal opening, which my translator caught in pieces because I was not fully listening. I was watching the Greth's left lateral side, watching the joint, watching the way it moved when the Greth walked, how close it came to opening, how the exoskeleton shifted and flexed. The arbiter finished speaking. The arena went quieter than it had been during the silence. The Greth moved. I had watched it move in footage 17 times over 2 viewings, and it was still faster than my body wanted to process. It covered the distance between us in a way that felt physically incorrect, like a film with frames missing, and I was already moving before my conscious mind had fully registered the initiation, pure reflex. 2 years of Defense Corps training and 3 years of professional fighting pulling me sideways and down and into a roll that brought me up behind where I had been standing. The Greth adjusted, fast. My shoulder said something that I filed under later. The first 30 seconds were noise and movement and the continuous narrow margin between what it was attempting and what I was preventing. I was not fighting it. Not yet. I had no intention of fighting it in the first 3 minutes. You do not fight a river in the moment of a flood. You find high ground and you wait, and you do not drown, and you do not stop moving. I kept moving. My shoulder was filing complaints with increasing urgency. I noted them and put them in the queue. The Greth hit me at the 40-second mark, partially. A glancing contact on my right side that was enough to send me sideways and down, and I used the momentum to roll rather than resist it, coming up and moving again, and the crowd made a sound I had not heard before, and which my translator rendered as nothing, because it was not a word. Minute 1, minute 2, and I was burning fuel I could not fully replace, but I had known that going in, and I had planned for it. Not comfort, not ease, just the expectation that it would cost what it was going to cost, and the decision that the cost was acceptable. The Greth extended, full reach, coming over the top, and the joint on its left lateral side opened for 0.4 seconds. I was not in position to do anything about it. I noted the position anyway. Minute 3. The Greth caught me once more, a real contact this time, and I did not roll out of it fully, and I went down on one knee, and there was a sound from the crowd that I recognized from every fight I had ever been in. The sound a crowd makes when they think they are about to see an ending. I got up. Not fast, not smooth. My knee said something worse than my shoulder had, and I filed it in the same cue, and I got up, and I was still there, and the 3-minute mark crossed in the space between the crowd's exhale and my next breath. The breath stopped. Not completely. Not in any way visible to someone who had not spent hours watching it on footage. A fraction of hesitation, a recalibration, the smallest possible interruption in the absolute forward momentum of 17 undefeated bouts. It had never been here before. Minute 4. The Graith had no map for minute 4. I did. I had run minute 4 1,000 times in gyms and in fields and in training rooms in Defense Corps facilities. Because I was not the biggest, and I was not the fastest, and I had learned very early that the only advantage I had reliably over larger opponents was that I could still be working when they started to slow down. The Graith did not slow down, not the way a human would, but it hesitated. And hesitation, in a fight, is a door. I was in the habit of walking through doors. It extended again at the 4-minute 40 mark, reaching for me with full force and full reach, and this time I was watching for it, tracking the left lateral side, and when the joint opened I was already moving toward it rather than away, dropping under the angle of the attack, driving upward with everything I had left in my legs, and my core, and the parts of me that had given all their polite notice, and were running purely on the terms I was setting for them. I hit the joint. I hit it in the way I had calculated across 23 bouts of footage and one night of planning on a floor in a cold room, the angle specific, the force concentrated, the point of impact as precise as I could make it with a moving target, and a body that was running a significant deficit. The Graith made a sound. Not the laugh from the assessment room, something different, something with edges in it. It went down to 2 of its lower limbs. Not all the way down, not finished, but down enough. I was standing over it, and I was breathing in the specific way that means your lungs are past negotiating, and my shoulder and my knee were submitting formal grievances, and the arena was completely silent. 50,000 beings. No sound. The arbiter spoke from across the floor, and the translator in my collar rendered it in that calm, neutral voice. Do you claim finality? I looked up. I found Fenwick in the stands. His silhouette was leaning forward, both hands on the railing in front of him. I looked back at the Graith. I looked at the arbiter. I breathed once. And then, slowly and clearly, in the direction of the arbiter and the crowd and the 50,000 species and the one exit and the drains in the white stone floor, I asked the question. Should I return it alive? I looked at the Graith. Or shredded. The arena went silent, the way a room goes silent, when something realizes it has made a very significant miscalculation. Not afraid, not angry. The silence of recalibration. 50,000 species simultaneously updating their understanding of something they had been certain they understood. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The arbiter's light shifted through something I had not seen it do before. The patterns moved faster, and then very, very slowly, cycling through frequencies I had no names for, in a being that had been in this hall for longer than some species had existed. I waited. I was good at waiting. I had learned it the same place I had learned everything else useful, in rooms where I was not supposed to be, doing things people had told me I would not be able to do, staying past the point where staying made obvious sense. The arbiter answered. The ceremony took 4 hours. It involved a great deal of formal language, the signing of documents that were not quite paper, and not quite anything I had a word for, the pressing of seals, and Fenwick, who had descended from the stands, and was standing beside me now with the specific expression of a man who has used up his entire reserve of composed reaction and is operating on empty. He cried a little when they confirmed Earth's membership in the Accord. I did not embarrass him by acknowledging it. My shoulder had been examined by a Varick medical official who communicated her findings through a translator with commendable precision and without obvious alarm, which I found reassuring. My knee had been wrapped. I had eaten again, and I had drunk more water than seemed reasonable, and I was functioning, which was all I required of myself at that particular moment. The Graith had been taken from the floor by a team of Varick officials after my question, and the Arbiter's answer, which had been, after a pause long enough to mean something, return it, whole. It would recover. I had done damage but not permanent damage, and the distinction had been my calculation from the beginning, because permanent damage was not what I was there to do. I was there to demonstrate something, and what I demonstrated did not require destroying anything. It required surviving long enough for something that had never lost to discover what losing felt like. That was enough. After the ceremony, when Fenwick was occupied with the paperwork and the handshakes, and the formal photographs that would be transmitted to Earth in about 6 hours, a Varric handler came to find me, and said that the High Arbiter was requesting a private meeting. I said fine. They brought me to a room smaller than the arena and larger than my quarters, low light, temperature even cooler than the hall had been, a table with 2 seats arranged on opposite sides of it. The Arbiter was already seated, alone, no handlers, no officials. I sat down across from it. We looked at each other for a moment without speaking. The Arbiter's light moved in those slow, considered patterns, and I watched it the way I had watched everything today, taking in information without yet deciding what to do with it. Then, in English, clear and precise and with no accent that I could identify, the Arbiter said, "Were you afraid?" I looked at it. It had always spoken English, this entire time. The translator in my collar had been redundant for hours, maybe since the beginning, and it had let me use it anyway, and I filed that fact in a place in my mind and left it there for later examination. I looked at its scarred appendage. "What hit your arm?" I said. "Tell me the full version." The Arbiter held still for a moment. Then it did something I had not seen it do. It turned the limb slightly, presenting the scar in better light, the raised tissue pale against the rest of its skin. "The species was called the Ven," it said. "They were small, smaller than you. They had no exoskeleton, no physical adaptation that our pre-trial assessments judged significant. Their world had almost nothing in the way of resources that the Accord valued." I waited. "Their combatant," the Arbiter continued, "was in this arena for 11 minutes and 42 seconds, longer than any other species before or since. She damaged the Greth more severely than any other combatant. She reached me in the arena, before the officiants could intervene." The Arbiter looked at its arm. She did not survive the trial. The room was quiet. "What did she do wrong?" I said. The Arbiter looked at me. Its light did that pattern again, the one that moved in a way different from all the others. "She attempted to end it," it said. "She found the vulnerability, the joint. She reached it, and she drove everything she had into it. Everything. At once. In minute 6. She went for the finish instead of the grind," I said. "She had no more to give after the attempt. The Greth recovered before she could follow through." I nodded. I thought about a combatant from a species that no longer existed. 11 minutes and 42 seconds in an arena. Finding the same vulnerability I had found. Making a different choice about what to do with it. Making the reasonable choice. The logical choice. You find the opening, you commit everything to it, you end it. She had run out of fuel trying. I had saved mine for minute 440. I had hit the joint with enough to matter, and kept enough in reserve to stay standing over the result. "She was braver than me," I said. "She was," the Arbiter said, and there was something in its voice that I recognized then, in that cool, quiet room, something that had been in its careful pauses and its measured answers, and the way it turned its scarred arm in the light. It was grief. Formatted differently, structured in a being built on different architecture, but grief the same way all grief is the same underneath its surface. It had been in this hall a very long time. It had watched a very long list of species find the same door and not get through it. "Were you afraid?" it asked me again. I looked at it. I thought about the floor of my room in the hours before the trial, the wall, my hands wrapped around each other, the place I went that I did not name. "The whole time," I said. The Arbiter held very still. "Then how?" it said. "Because the whole time did not last forever," I said. "Every minute ends. Every fight ends. The question is whether you end before it does." "That is not a strategy," the Arbiter said. "No," I said. "It is a theology." The Arbiter was quiet for a long moment. Its light moved through something slow and complex, layers of color shifting through it, in no pattern I had catalogued before. We designed the trial, it said, to identify species that were dangerous. Species whose admission to the Accord posed a risk to existing members. A species that could defeat the Greth was a species that warranted careful consideration. A pause. We did not anticipate. It stopped. It looked at me. It did not have the word. I could see it searching for something in English that fit what it was trying to say, and not finding it, and looking at me the way you look at someone when you need them to understand something you cannot quite make language do. I had felt that before. I had lived in that space. The thing you are that does not have a name yet because the people naming things have not met you yet. I said the word. Stubborn, I said. The arbiter looked at me. We are stubborn, I said. It is not strategy, and it is not heroism, and it is not some special gift we have been given. It is just that we do not stop. We have never been very good at stopping. Circumstances have tried, repeatedly. We are still here. The arbiter's light moved through that pattern for a long, long moment. Then it said very quietly, "Yes, that is the word." I nodded. I stood up, because there was nothing else to say that would improve on what had just been said, and the arbiter let me, which I took as confirmation. I walked back to the corridor. I found my handler waiting. I followed them to the transport. Fenwick was already aboard, asleep in his seat before we had cleared the docking clamps, in the way of a man whose body has spent the last several hours mainlining the chemical consequences of extreme anxiety and is now demanding repayment. I left him to it. I sat near the porthole. The stars came back as we cleared the station, the same view I had been cataloging on the way in, the same habit, the same hands that wanted something to do. I did not count them this time. I picked up my notebook instead. The circled note from the night before. It does not know what to do with someone who is still moving at minute 4, already crossed out and replaced with what had actually happened. A record of the real thing instead of the plan for it, which is how all plans end if you are lucky. I turned to a new page. I wrote nothing for a while. Then I wrote, "The galaxy thought it was testing us." I looked at that for a moment. I wrote underneath it, "We have been testing ourselves since before we had words for it." I looked at the stars. I wrote the last line alone, on its own line, with space around it. They just finally got to watch. I closed the notebook. Outside the porthole, the stars went on in every direction without end, and we were among them now. Earth and all its stubborn, fuel-burning, floor-sitting, handshaking, grief-carrying, laugh-at-the-wrong-moment people, with a membership in the Galactic Accord and a Varick arbiter somewhere behind us that now knew the word for what we were. I leaned my head back against the wall of the transport. My shoulder ached. My knee ached. The things in me that had given notice and kept working anyway were beginning their accounting. I let them. We had time. We had 30 hours of transit back to the relay point, and Fenwick snoring across the aisle, and a notebook with a plan crossed out and the real thing written over it, and a galaxy that had spent longer than our species had existed deciding what we were worth. We told them. I closed my eyes. Sweet, merciful hell, we told them.